Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast of Catholicism, Science, and the Paranormal. We're Dirty Habits. I'm Brother Chris O'Donnell.
I'm Brother Justin Panlasigi.
And tonight we're going to be kind of extending one of the earlier podcasts we did, talking about apparitions, specifically, though, discerning an apparition source, especially if it's a source that you don't want to deal with, an evil spirit, a fallen damned soul, etc. So we're going to be looking at that today. But before we do, so what are we drinking today,
All
Justin?
right, so we're back. We're back with Mother Earth, local California or local San Diegan brew. This one is their vanilla cream ale creamsicle. It's delicious.
And what are you drinking, Quinn?
Just a Speedway.
A Speedway.
All right, so tonight, as we try to always do, we're going to look at basic information. We try to give experiences or encounters from the lives of the saints a lot, from Scripture. In terms of Scripture, as we've mentioned before in our talk on ghosts, the Church does accept the existence of ghosts if we recognize that by a ghost we mean the disembodied soul of a deceased human being, whether that person is one of the glorified in heaven, one of the holy souls in purgatory, or whether one of the damned. And of course, now we're going to extend and expand a little bit today on the idea. We also know as Christians we believe in purely spiritual entities, both good and evil, angels and demons, for lack of a better term, which also can appear to human beings as well. Now, I don't think last time we actually defined an apparition. And so what is an apparition? The first thing I'll mention is vision and apparition are used pretty much interchangeably in Catholic spirituality. Starting with St. Augustine, way back in the 400s, Augustine came up with 3 types of visions that a person can have. One of those visions is specifically the type we would refer to today as apparitions. And I don't want to get too technical. To be honest, I'm not sure if I fully understand it myself, but the 3 types of visions that Augustine mentioned are corporeal, imaginative, and intellectual. And basically, at the most simple level I can put it, a corporeal vision is one that we actually perceive with our bodily eyes, sort of like in normal sight, but this time it's supernaturally imposed, or kind of we're seeing something supernatural. That's what an apparition would be. We see it with our actual physical eyes. Now, the other 2, just for understanding, is the imaginative vision, which God places or the devil can place within our imagination. So we see something, but it's not really externally outside of us. It's actually just in our imagination. And then the deepest and most highest level of vision is the intellectual, which can only be placed by God. Only God has access to that deepest spiritual level of us. And in that sense, that one is the most safe, but it's also the most difficult to kind of actually discern.
So, question.
Yeah.
Our Lady of Fatima. She appears to the children, and they can see her, but the crowds cannot see her.
Right.
So this wouldn't be a corporeal vision. This would be imaginative?
I think so. Let me see if I can...
We have notes. An image
Right.
supernaturally produced in the imagination is an imaginative vision, usually accompanied by an alienation of the external senses, so the visionary does not confuse the vision with that which is perceived through the external senses. Okay, so that doesn't sound like Our Lady of Fatima.
No, I think the corporeal vision actually mentions Mary.
Oh, okay.
Just because it's corporeal doesn't mean everybody can see it, although often that does occur, but not always. I suppose it could still be only for certain people to be able to see. St. Paul seems to have had that similar thing where the people around him heard a voice but couldn't see whatever it was that he saw. Now, we're talking about sort of understanding these visions if we have something. And, it sounds very high and spiritual, but I kind of want to make the understanding that in deep prayer, in journaling, in meditation, any Catholic, you don't have to be some living saint at this point in your Catholic journey of faith. Any one of us can have a vision, so to speak, or some kind of images that come into our mind. Or maybe it's not although it's not a vision, the same thing would be when we hear auricular things. We hear whether in our conscience, our mind, or actually physically hear something. I guess it's similar to visions. Some people literally hear a voice. Others hear a voice sort of in their mind. Others sort of in the depths of their conscience.
I wonder if like the less academic you are, the easier you can receive something like that too.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like Mary appears to children
Right.
a lot of times. The Eucharist will float over a child's head, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
So the other thing about discernment, the discernment is really the same thing as what we call testing the spirits or discerning of spirits. And there's two types of discernment, broadly speaking. There's a type of discernment which is a charismatic gift that's specifically bestowed upon certain people. That kind of discernment is almost like an automatic supernatural sense. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. Those who have that, that's amazing. And many of the saints develop something like that. They know people's thoughts or they know their heart. We're talking about discernment, which is available to any one of us as a Christian, simply by cultivating that spiritual sense of the Spirit working in us and with us. So that the Christian, in the words of Hebrews, in the words of the letter to the Hebrews, our faculties become trained by practice to discern good and evil. So that's the one we're going to be talking about today. And one of the things that's important to realize is in the Bible, there are two words in the New Testament for the term word. There's the word that a person receives, that would be like the word that an apparition speaks to you or something like that. That word is rhema. And that's distinguished from the word, which is Christ, logos. And so the rhema is your personal word. We call it private revelation nowadays. And one of the main things, though, is that anything that the rhema says must always be in perfect accord with the divine word, the logos, right? That's how the first step to know that you're at least on the right track. Basically, when the saints or even ordinary people have these experiences and they either see their spiritual director, or in the case of something where it becomes widely or broadly enough known that it brings in higher authorities in the church like bishops or something, some of the basic things are anything revealed by the apparition has to be free from doctrinal error and moral evil. Those kind of things disqualify it right off the bat. And that's true for us personally as well. Even if it's not this big vision, you know, if you receive something in your soul or your mind and on the face it's clearly contradicting the church's teaching or sacred scripture, or it's clearly, you know, going against the moral teaching, the moral reality of the gospel, already you can know that that's not going to be followable. That's nothing that's either coming from you yourself or it's coming from what we refer to as the evil spirit. Also, it's important, and what the Vatican does when they officially look at these things is they also look at the facts surrounding it and make sure, they call it manifest error of the facts. That is, when you have knowledge or you have this experience that also contains information that is not, quote, religious, do those facts meet the truth of history or the event? Now, they call it manifest because it's clear that people can kind of mistake or misunderstand certain things. But if it's something that's clearly at odds with anything happening in the real world, then it becomes very suspect, and people need to look at it.
So what would you do then? What would like the step? Let's say that you do have a vision of some apparition appears, and gives you instruction that is contradictory to the faith. What's the next step?
Well, at
You're
that
at your
point,
house,
I think,
you call a priest, bless the house.
Yeah.
You move out of the house.
I think just ignoring it at that point,
Case by
maybe
case.
praying about it. Yeah.
See, but it'd be difficult for me, like if it were me, to ignore an apparition that seems to be a malevolent one that's in my house. I think I wouldn't be able to ignore like that sort of experience.
Yeah,
There'd have to be a step that we'd have to take after that, right? Like,
yeah,
call one of your priest friends to come bless the house, bless the people. You know, basically shake down those spirits,
right?
Get them out of there.
And I guess it depends on what. it would probably depend, I think, on what the characteristics the apparition takes. If the apparition is clearly from the beginning kind of hostile or antagonistic, well then yeah, you probably need deliverance prayers, you need protection prayers, maybe even something, we call it exorcism, but as I'll point out later, there's a lot of levels of what that means. If it actually is something sort of appearing as something good, but you clearly perceive through your, through the Spirit and through your own understanding of the gospel that it's something evil, you may not need to go to that extreme. It's probably just a more, in that case, that's almost like a more expanded or detailed version of the normal temptations I think we get all the time, trying to trick you into sort of following something. But I mean, it's always, like you said, it's always safe to bring in a priest or someone who can do those kind of things. Because, and what we're talking about today are we're mainly focusing on those apparitions that aren't absolutely clear. They at least appear on the surface to be legitimate. And there's a lot of experiences of the saints in that way, right? Even St. Paul says Satan appears in his ministers as angels of light.
Right.
So when they appear in that way, which is clearly to seduce us, to trick us, to kind of move us in the wrong direction, at that point we really have to rely to an extent on our experience of Christ, our knowledge of what he's like in his character. And I think that helps us. In fact, maybe one of the first stories we can...
Yeah, I wanted to share this story about St. Martin of Tours because it's really interesting. It tells us a lot about, I guess, just how you ought to approach discerning a spirit, but at the same time, it's interesting. If I were in St. Martin's shoes, I'm not sure that I would have been as wise as he was, but I'll just read the story. So Sulpicius Severus relates that Martin was deep in prayer one night when he suddenly beheld a celestial being, radiant and wearing royal apparel, who announced that Martin was to adore him. The saint, at first dazzled by the being's appearance, kept a long and deep silence. The angel broke the silence, saying, "Martin, acknowledge that you behold Christ. I was about to descend to the earth, but I wish to first manifest myself to you." Martin, however, continued to keep silence upon hearing these words, and gave no answer whatever. The figure then repeated his declaration, "Martin, why do you hesitate to believe when you see? I am Christ." The man of God, listening intently to the spirit rather than the apparition, recognized the truth that it was the devil and not Christ. And so Martin replied, saying, "The Lord Jesus did not predict that he would come clothed in purple and with a glittering crown upon his head. I will not believe that Christ has come unless he appears with that appearance and form in which he suffered, and openly displaying the marks of his wounds upon the cross." Upon hearing these words, the devil immediately vanished, and the room was filled with a horrendous odor. And that is the story. And what's interesting about it to me is that if I were in St. Martin's shoes, I don't know that I would have been so triumphant over the hoax. I think that for me, I would have thought of Christ saying he's going to come in glory, he'll come as a son of man on the clouds, and oh yeah, I mean, I'd probably have a harder time discerning the spirit. However, yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts? If this type of celestial being had appeared and appeared sort of in a kingly fashion, I'm not sure that, I don't know how to take that. Yeah. Is it just that he didn't have the wounds on his hands or on his feet? Was it that he was clothed in sort of majestic garments?
One part that kind of right at the beginning struck me is, it didn't say what he said, but it said something about when he first appeared, he says, Martin was to adore him. And maybe, I don't know, would Christ come and demand adoration in the sense that...
I don't know.
Yeah.
St. Faustina's Divine Mercy vision seems to be exactly that. Christ as a vision in the sky, demanding all people pay homage to him, and those who do are given that, it's basically humanity gets that last chance to repent and some will and some won't, and he'll separate out the sheep and goats right then,
So
It's
going
tough.
back
It's
to one of our earlier talks,
Yeah.
maybe you would have thought the vampire in Midnight Mass was an angel.
See, but
Just kidding.
I'm telling you, once serpent fangs go into your mouth or into your neck,
Yeah.
start sucking your blood out, and then you die. You literally die. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but angels don't do that.
Yeah.
They kind of just leave you dead. They don't bring you back as like an undead
Yeah.
that wants to eat blood.
As Franciscans, I guess, though, it is interesting that Martin, and I guess after reading these stories, I guess I finally begin to understand why Martin was such a big deal in the Middle Ages. When I first was a Franciscan, I never knew, why is it St. Martin's Day that marks the beginning of our 40-day pre-Christmas fast? Why is it?
Mm-hmm.
But the more you read about these, in a lot of ways, he was very Franciscan, in the sense of, cutting his coat for the leper, all the different things. And one
Focusing
of
on
the
the
things here
humility.
seems... Right, that's what I was going to say. One of the things here, it seems to be very Franciscan. He's looking for the crucified, humble Christ, kind of a Philippians, the one who emptied himself and humbled himself to that extent. But yeah, I don't know either. And again, this is what I was kind of mentioning when we were talking before, is there's nothing in this that he comes directly on the surface saying, you should sin, you've got to do this. There's almost no message at all. It's just seeing if he'll kind of foolishly just obey the fallen angel. So, one of the things Martin shows us too is, once you discover his ploy, the evil spirit tends to flee pretty quickly. Once he's discovered, it's like he can't use that subterfuge anymore. And one of the things I thought was interesting is St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, who really wrote a lot on discernment, speaks about the fact that, quote, it's characteristic of the evil spirit to harass with anxiety, to afflict with sadness, to raise obstacles backed by fallacious reasoning that disturb the soul. Now, in Martin's case, none of that seems to occur, but I think for most people, when we have these encounters, there's something that just doesn't sit right with us. And it's interesting because Ignatius again goes on to tell us that the evil one generally conducts himself in three ways. So the first way, and I apologize, is not PC at all, but the first way the devil acts is like a cowardly woman. Says he's a weakling before a show of strength and a tyrant if he has his will. Like women. No, just kidding. Just kidding. The enemy becomes weak, loses courage, and turns to fight with his seductions as soon as one leading a spiritual life faces his temptations boldly and does exactly the opposite. What he's really just saying is that Satan puts on a big act, but the moment he's actually directly opposed by a person,
he cowers away.
Right, he cowers away. The second one that Ignatius uses is the false lover. And without describing everything Ignatius says, it's basically the person who he wants all your attention, but he never wants to meet your parents. He's always kind of hiding back. There's clearly something wrong and secretive about the relationship, knowing that once it's revealed, he won't be able to succeed in whatever it is he has planned. And then the final one, being a military man himself, Ignatius of Loyola, he talks about Satan acting like a military commander, that he investigates from every side all of our virtues, theological virtues, cardinal virtues, moral virtues, and where he finds the defense of eternal salvation the weakest and most deficient, there he attacks and tries to take us by storm.
Interesting.
So I guess generally he tries suggestiveness, temptation, but every once in a while, it'd still be in the form of a temptation. If there's a part of us that really is our weak link, sometimes he'll just hit it with everything he has at a short spurt to see if it gives in. Whether it's, for us, it's pride or lust or gluttony, whatever it happens to be for that particular person. So let's talk about another saint, and that is Saint Anthony. And in the life of Anthony, written by yet another saint, Saint Athanasius, who writes about the Saint Anthony, and Anthony really being the father of the desert. One of the things about Anthony's life is, he, like later the Cure d'Ars, whom I didn't include in today, but maybe we will at another time, there are certain saints who seem to have had a long battle with the enemy throughout most of their lives. And Anthony's one of the first to kind of put this forward. the struggle would be witnessed by many other people who came to visit him out in the desert. And Athanasius tells us that they would hear tumults, sounds. They would see things in the form of what looked like ravenous animals that would gather around his area, his hermitage at night. They would hear just loud clashing noises to keep everything up. And then at one point, finally, Anthony decides to kind of face the devil head on. And he feels called to spend a night in a large tomb that's near the place where he resides. Dang. Now, once he arrives, we're told a huge group of demons descend upon him and they attacked him physically. And we're told the devil, quote, so cut him with stripes that he lay on the ground speechless from excessive pain. And the next day, one of his friends comes to check on him, finds him unconscious, that he's been so badly beaten, that he takes him home to a nearby village. But that evening, Anthony recovers and decides that he wants to go back and try it again.
Dang.
And so he tells his friend, shut me in this time.
Wow.
And as soon as he does, he challenges the demons head on. He says, here am I, Anthony. I flee not from your stripes, and even if you inflict more, nothing shall ever separate me from the love of Christ. And Athanasius then goes on to say, from his understanding of Anthony's life, in the night they made such a din, the whole of the place seemed to shake as if it was an earthquake. The demons, as if breaking the four walls of the dwelling, seemed to enter through them. They came in the likeness of beasts. Altogether with the noises of these apparitions, their angry ragings were dreadful. And although still in great pain, what Anthony does is he declares without fear, quote, if there had been any power in any of you, it would have sufficed had just one of you come. But since the Lord has made you weak, you attempt to terrify me by numbers alone. But as proof of your weakness that you take the shapes of brute beasts. But faith in our Lord is a seal and a wall of safety to us. And then immediately the tomb was filled with light. His pains disappeared. The demons fled. And he heard the Lord speaking to him, saying this, Anthony, I was here the whole time, but I waited to see your fight. Since you have endured and have not been beaten, I will now ever be a shield to you, and you will make your name known everywhere.
So, Brother Chris, do you know who Bazarutin is?
I've heard that name.
He's
on
like
YouTube stuff.
Hall of Famer UFC fighter.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, did he find the UFC? Well, he's a
martial
fighter.
artist guy.
Mixed martial artist.
Yeah.
Revert to his Catholic faith as an adult. And he's hardcore. Like, he rolls with, like, Father Ripperger and stuff. Like, he's hardcore Catholic now.
Is he the one who challenged a demon physically?
That's why I bring him up.
Okay.
So, he's living in this house with his family, and he and his kid start seeing an apparition in the house. And it's, like, basically like everything you would imagine in a horror movie. You know, like weird things start happening. They start seeing this figure of this really ragged looking woman. I'm totally paraphrasing, so I might be getting some of this wrong, but they see like this ragged woman like going through the house and stuff. And he'll be like, Bazarutin talks about how he'd be in the shower and he would feel the oppression of the woman like pushing him up against the walls and stuff while he's in the shower. Just crazy. And so one day he just gets sick of it and he goes out into the middle of the house while the family's gone. He just challenges the spirit. He's like, I'm right here. Come on, let's do this. We'll throw down. And for a while, the oppression disappears. But then later on, he talks to Father Ripperger about it. And Father Ripperger says, yeah, you probably shouldn't ever do that ever again, like challenging spirits like that. Because, I mean... And so I bring that up because, one, was St. Anthony at this time... Was he ordained?
I don't think so. He was still fairly early into his I think he's 35 years old, we're told, at the time of this event when this occurs. So
very interesting, because Father Ripperger gives very different advice from what St. Anthony lived by and seems to be rewarded for. But what's interesting is, even back when I first heard this story from Bazarutin, it was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago that I think he shared it online. But I remember thinking that St. Bernard of Clairvaux says exactly the same kind of thing that St. Anthony lived by here, which is, look, the devil's going to come after you. He's going to send all of his minions after you, but you stand up to them, and if you stand up to them, they'll flee.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that's what St. James says, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or resist the devil and he'll
Mm-hmm.
flee from you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. And then on Father Ripperger's side, I have heard similar though. When people challenge, what'll happen is it seems to get quiet for a day or two or so, and then all of a sudden it comes back like tenfold.
Oh.
But I have to admit I never paid close enough attention to see those people where they're coming from spiritually. If you're
true.
not in a place spiritually where you're not protected by Christ, you don't have the Spirit. I mean, the things can escalate and overpower you in a way that maybe the saints, and even just normal Christians have a defense against, or at least something that they can rely and stand on.
I wish that more of that wisdom was pervade across our culture. Especially in the West, there's been a huge resurgence in witchcraft and conjuring and trying to do seances and communicating with spiritual entities. And you really don't know what you're calling down on yourself. If you're really immature in your spirituality, this could be a really bad idea. It almost typically always is a really bad idea to do.
Yeah. And it is why more Christians, more Catholics specifically, priests and deacons, but even lay people need to know it better, because I hear so many stories on the internet, and given their ghost hunter type stories and stuff, but still enough that I hear that people experience this stuff and they first do turn to the church, because they're probably, most of them are Christian, and the church's kind of response is almost more like the secular world of it's probably nothing, and then they end up going to New Age people and spread their sage around and everything, and it's like we kind of lost a lot of opportunity and reality there for these people of what's going on. But Father Jordan Amon, who wrote a book called Spiritual Theology, which I highly recommend if you can get a copy. I think it's still in print. But Father Amon, only one section, he speaks about demons and what they can do. And he actually gives a long list, which we're not going to go through in this podcast today, on what demons, the experience, the feelings that the evil spirit brings in people. But what I will touch on a little bit is he does indicate what they can and cannot do in a general sense. So in terms of like some miraculous thing, if the apparition, if you receive something that's more than just seeing something, more than just hearing words, and it actually does something, how do we know now? Well, now it seems to be miraculous. Are we looking at something holy or not? Here's what he says, and he's gathered this from 2,000 years of the church, the exorcisms, all those lives of the saints, etc. At the time when he wrote this book, I think in the 80s. He wrote, demons cannot do any of the following. So these are things that are impossible for them to do. They cannot produce any kind of truly supernatural phenomenon, such as they cannot create a substance from nothing. Only God can do so. They cannot bring the dead back to life, although they can. He doesn't explain this, but it's very interesting. He says, but they can produce the illusion of doing so. They cannot make truly prophetic predictions, since only God knows the future absolutely. And they cannot know the secrets of a person's mind and heart. So, but what they can do, and this maybe is what we need to focus on more, because maybe it's not what we tend to think about, they can produce visions, corporeal ones, that is apparitions, or even ones in your imagination. Not in the intellect, only God has the ability to reach that deep into our depths of our human soul. They can falsify the experience of religious ecstasy. They can instantaneously cure sicknesses that they caused. I think that's interesting. Not ones that caused by nature,
so they can just
or
take
ones
away something they've given you.
Right. And Tertullian, way back in was he in the 200s, I believe? He even refers to this in one of his writings called The Apology of Christian Religion. He says, quote, first of all, the demons make you ill. Then to get a miracle out of it, they prescribe the remedy completely novel or contrary to those in use. And thereupon, withdrawing the hurtful influence, they are then supposed to have wrought you with your cure. So, very interesting that they can cause something to some extent. And I guess we see this in the book of Job, where he receives issue. They can produce the stigmata, which I think is interesting. They can simulate miracles and the phenomenon of levitation and bilocation. And we see that a lot in the really extreme, at least in the popular imagination of exorcism, right? The people floating off the beds, the different...
Yeah.
Am I needing to... They can make objects or people seem to disappear. They can cause us to hear sounds or voices. They can cause people to speak in tongues. And they can declare a fact which is hidden or distant. And the way he kind of sums up what a demon can do, I think in the basic level, is this last statement is kind of the best. He says, whatever nature or science can cause, a devil can also do. They're just simply working. I mean, we can do it, right? We can do a lot of, quote, miraculous things using components of nature. The demon just doesn't need that intermediate step. It can go instantaneously from knowing that knowledge to sort of producing something that would be a natural, quote, occurrence. And we have a story. This is not one of the well-known martyrs nowadays. Her name was Mavra. She was an Eastern Catholic martyr. As she was dying on the cross, she was herself crucified. The devil came to her and tried to delude her while she was dying, sort of to give her, so at the very end of her life, as she's dying a martyr, to kind of end that. He appeared to her as an angel who had come to help by offering her a cup filled with water and honey. She suggested to him that they pray together as she dies. And at that moment, the angel could no longer do so. And it was clear to her at that moment then that this was a demonic delusion. So just another sort of interesting story we have of an experience of one of the martyrs. And another area where we've seen what the demons feel like, what they can do, maybe also to look at if it's a positive discernment, even if it's a difficult one. If it truly is of God, if it's truly one of his holy angels, one of his saints, the Lord himself, Our Lady speaking to you, then how should we look at that? Well, there's the fruits reality. The first is look at the fruits in the terms of the biblical fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. But there's also some other things that tend to arise in like these visionaries. We can take the big visionaries, but this is true of any Christian who experiences these kind of personal revelations, private revelations that aren't necessarily meant for the rest of the world, but are just meant for you yourself in your spiritual journey. And what are those? Well, some of the things as time goes on and you put the revelation, the vision into practice, so to speak, the church has designated certain things. One is called God-Directedness. In other words, if it's really of God, then over time, if not immediately, the person should be brought more and more to direct their lives towards, God and really ground their lives on him and focus on him. There'll be an experience of a new or deeper love that arises, more than they had before. When you have like the visionaries at Fatima and who are young children at the time. But the concern they develop very early on as young people for others and such. You see the charity that wells up in people. Third one, we begin to develop what's called a cross asceticism. That is, people want naturally to start practicing penance, to start living in a way that's more penitential, both for themselves, but also in reparation for the sins of others. They become more frugal, right? Having touched the divine, a lot of the things of life and the excess we bring on ourselves, whether it's material or food or whatever, seems to fall away little by little, and people's lives become simplified from the experience they've had of the Lord. One thing that's interesting too, that Father Thomas DeBay, who sadly passed away now, but another great modern spiritual writer in the church, he talks about the fact that one of the difficult ones, but clearly one that often happens, and Jesus proclaimed it himself, is that you often find yourself having experienced this revelation or having been given this guidance, you tend to find yourself at odds with the prevailing spirit of the world, right? Your life will change in ways that people, even close family, friends, may think you're a little bit odd. They'll think you're a fanatic. You don't do the things that they used to do.
You show up to events wearing brown robes
Right.
sometimes. Notice how none of these things involve you sucking the blood out of your fellow parishioner.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. And then bringing them back from the dead as a vampire.
Quinn, you've been quiet this whole talk. Got nothing today? No?
No. This is stuff that's so out of my realm of like.
Quinn's our skeptic. She doesn't she believes they happen, just not to most people.
Well, we don't even believe that Quinn, we're not sure that she's even real. She could just be a disembodied voice that we're talking to.
Just the two of you.
Mm-hmm. We're just trying to hype up. What does Quinn actually look like?
2001. What are
Oh,
you
yeah.
doing, Justin?
No.
And all the doors start closing and everything. Trapped in the simulation of Quinn.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, with this information, how should this affect our spirituality in general? A lot of times when we pray, I think this is very common. When we pray, we're asking for some sort of response.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get a response, there's always that question of, how do I know for sure that I'm actually hearing something that the Lord wants me to hear? Whether it be just a thought in my mind, something in my imagination, right? Or something that I feel is actually an allocution of some sort is being spoken to me. Some people might get some sort of vision. We've had friends who have had experiences that are just kind of otherworldly and kind of out there, sort of supernatural in nature or paranormal in nature. So I guess the important thing is that regardless of what it is that you feel you're receiving in response to your prayers, because again, I think a lot of us, when we pray, we're asking for a response. We're asking for some sort of guidance that we can understand, that we hear, and we can process and reason through. I think it's important that we follow the guidelines that we've gone over today in really discerning whether or not that is truly something from God. Is it bringing me closer to Him? Is it in accordance with His commandments, with the commandments of the church? Is what I'm hearing really just me trying to convince myself to compromise? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times, right? We get that. There was an interesting story I had heard. Oh man, I'm going to really screw this one up because I forget what religious order it was. I know it was in the Middle Ages at some point, and it was a saint of some sort who had been given this direction or had this experience, but
sound very Catholic.
Sounds very Catholic. Somewhere in there. Somewhere in the Apocrypha. Very Catholic. Anyway, so there's a saint. He's at his friary or in his cloister. I forget what order it was, but definitely a consecrated brother of some sort, and they had just finished their prayers in the chapel, and it was time then for them to do their standard routine. We're going to go and do like whatever it is that we have to do next, because they live by a very strict set of like a very strict daily schedule. So, but right after the prayers, he has this vision of the Blessed Virgin, and the Blessed Virgin appears to him and says, or what appears to be the Blessed Virgin says, why don't you just stay here with me a little bit longer? You know, the brothers can just go off and do their thing. They're not going to miss you. Just stay with me a little bit longer. Well, so the brother is approached, because he stays there for a little bit. He's approached by his superior, comes over, and superior says, what are you doing? And the brother says, the Virgin Mary has asked me to stay here and pray a little bit longer. And the superior says, the Blessed Virgin would want you to be obedient. That's not the Blessed Virgin. Come with us. And so he's like, oh, you're right. So he gets up and he goes. It's like, the demons almost got me on that one. Yeah. Very interesting, right? But it's that kind of thing that that I think we need to take out of this, is the discernment needs to be very, very informed and very careful. And I think that particular story also sort of underscores the importance of having other people walking on the journey with you, a spiritual director, people who are very spiritual that you trust, very active in their faith, who live their faith as well that can help guide you through these sorts of things, you know, because I think I know for me, when I'm left to my own devices in discerning like messages that I'm given and stuff, I will probably come to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
As I admitted earlier, if I was Saint Martin of Tours, it's like, whoa, sweet, Jesus came to me first.
Yeah.
You know?
It's funny because I haven't had full-blown visions like some of these people are talking about, but like you said, you'll get these images in your mind. You'll have these, I guess maybe the imaginative type visions, especially when we usually start our 90-day really big fast. Like usually those first
Exodus
few
90?
weeks as I like pour into it,
yeah.
I start getting like cleansed out.
Yeah.
But
shout out to Exodus 90.
Yeah.
every Catholic guy needs to try that at least once. So.
But what's interesting is like those visions never. I assume most of them are at least semi-valid if they're, or at least nothing more than my own. But I feel almost bad because I'll talk about them and they'll guide me for a day or two, and then they're kind of, which.
Yeah.
But I wonder because John of the Cross, one of the great mystical doctors of the church, he basically says, don't even worry about those. Like even if you get ones, and even if they're from God, it's all right. Like don't worry about it. Whether you have to put it into practice or because he kind of maybe he's sort of coming where you're coming from, saying, look, the effort it takes to even figure out if it's really from God or not, well, just don't worry about it. God's going to keep working with you anyway. So it was from him. He's not offended, and if it's not from him, you protected yourself.
But see, that's the importance of having other people walking with you. Like my wife is great because I could fully trust her to give me a good read on something like that. But I went, hey, hon, I think I had this weird vision. And she'd be like, I don't think so. Yeah. I do the same for her, too, where it's like, I don't know. We should think about that later. And, yeah. Anyway, the St. Martin story is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting story.
Let's make Quinn answer a question. Quinn, do you think you should ask for a vision?
Yeah.
Like we do on a thing in our prayers, but do you think it should be a vision? Yes? How come?
I think so, because you can ask God anything, right? Like, if you're asking for... But the thing is that you really do have to discern it.
Do you think it's humble, though? Like, I want a vision, where everyone else just gets the Bible.
No, because we're always asking for signs.
Right, that's
right?
what
sure.
Justin was saying.
Like, just let me know, just something that helps me to know that you're listening. Although I do think that is, like I said, it is presumptuous to kind of, but I think you can ask in a way that isn't like that. That's a more, it's not about demands, but it's about like, where you're at in your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that's just how our human nature operates. We have a mind's eye that reasons through things and comes to a clear picture that guides where we move, and so I think that's like totally normal for us to go, hey Lord, can you at least tell me something?
Right.
Because otherwise what is there for us, like for us to feel confident about something aside from just feeling sort of blindly confident about it, I guess.
Now Quinn, you have tons of dreams. Do you think any of those are prophetic?
You have prophetic dreams?
No.
But
they're just very strange.
Ducks wearing fedoras and all kinds of weird stuff.
You dream about waterfowl?
Just one time. One time. One time.
Wearing men's headwear.
Yes.
Excellent.
So but you've never...
I do dream a lot with water. Like water is very present in my dream. If you're a dream interpreter.
Yeah. My dreams are usually like action movies or something. Something that's totally far-fetched and I would never be able to do it in real life. Like total James Bond. Like...
are you like the person that...
Oh, I'm always a protagonist. It's like, I'm like snapping people's necks and stuff and running around and saving the world, and just not even remotely realistic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a thought though, real quick, but you know how I forget which saint in one of the lectures that you had given at one of our Franciscan meetings but you had mentioned how the teaching of this saint was that the Spirit always points us to Christ, and Christ always points us to the Father. And it may be what was the real thing that gave St. Martin pause, was that here's this being coming down as Christ and saying, no, worship me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, hey, use the grace of the Spirit to worship the Father because I'm here. You know, that would be a little bit more what you would expect the risen Lord to come and say in his triumph. Like, the kingdom of the Father is at hand, you know, and point back to him.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Just a thought. I guess you should probably feel pretty weirded out by any celestial being that appears to you and says, I am Jesus, worship me.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Right.
So
it's funny, when I used to do First Communion years ago, there was a kid. He wasn't a bad kid, but he was all over the place.
He's a pretty bad kid.
And so during First Communion, I literally had to sit next to him during the ceremony because the kid sat in front, the parents are behind. So I had to sit next to this kid.
Oh, he's a fizzing.
And so we go up, and well, I stayed because all the kids go up for communion by themselves with their parents behind them, and then I go after. And he comes back, this kid, he was just so different. And he sits down, he's like praying, you know, like they're supposed to. We've told him, come back to your seat and pray. And then he looks at me, and this like 7-year-old, who I don't think was making it up because of his whole face and everything, he's like, the first time you had communion, he's all, did you see Jesus? And I said, like in the Eucharist? He goes, no, like Jesus. And I was like, no, I didn't. He's all, oh. And just like turned back, and I'm like, that kid just saw Jesus. Like, Jesus looked at this punk kid and goes, here I am. Stop goofing around.
Yeah, he needed it.
Yeah.
He needed it more than you do.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Have you ever had anything beyond just like the ones you might get in prayer? Like, have you ever had a real experience that you might consider to be the level of a vision? Like,
not a vision, but I know that there are about 4 or 5 moments in my life where true Saint Therese level contemplation happened, where just I felt that sort of penetrating union with the Lord, but not the level of a vision. No, and really, my family, I can't think of anyone who shared any stories with me where they've had something like that. Have you? You think?
So I do have one story, and I kind of hesitate to do it because even among like people like you who are faithful and friends and I trust, you know, I think you always still have that idea that this is so weird, like people are going to listen to your story and go, that's a little bit odd. But I had been going to adoration at St. Mary's for months. And
shout out to St. Mary's, because they have perpetual adoration. And very few parishes do that anymore. So, yeah.
One day I was there, and it was funny because normally it'd be a really crowded time, and they're supposed to have 2 people there all the time. But for whatever reason, I look up at a certain point, and I realize I'm the only person in the whole chapel. And it was about 10:30, 11 during the day. And so I was praying, but by then I'd had my eyes open, and I closed them again. And then when I opened them, so it's like I said, it's kind of embarrassing, but I saw Mary, and I mean, I saw Mary. And what was weird about it is she never didn't say a word to me. It lasted maybe a minute. I think it was corporeal. She seemed to be there, that I was looking at her.
Whoa!
And what was really weird, but kind of gives insight to me at least about her apparitions throughout the world, is as she looked at me, it was like she was turning to like say something. As she would move, her hair would like transform into every color of humanity you could possibly imagine, her face and stuff. Without being weird though, it just like was so natural as it flowed, and then it was gone. But even today, when I think about it, to this day, and that's been years now,
How long ago was this?
Roughly about a decade ago, almost. So a while ago.
Whoa! So we've known each other.
Yeah. I haven't told a lot of people.
Well, I am shocked.
Well, now I've told a lot of people, but it's
shocked you haven't mentioned this before.
So
that's amazing. What was she wearing?
Well, that was the thing too.
Was she in blue?
Her clothes like transformed as well. It was really different, but it didn't sound as weird as it sounds. It all seemed so
She
like
looked like
normal,
a bunch of different icons morphing.
almost like that. Yeah, but it was so natural and smooth. It wasn't like weird or stunted or like it just like occurred as you. It would go from like blonde to red to black to like the hair and everything. And I just remember. Remember she was like really. It really is that idea of like just beautiful that you can't even imagine.
She didn't say anything?
She didn't say a word to me. Just but kept me going.
Didn't say anything to you?
No. So I want to ask Quinn another question. Because Quinn is like the holiest person I know almost. Super religious. But
gluttonous? Is that what someone's going to say?
You can't eat as much as she does. Well, I guess Thomas Aquinas ate a whole lot.
He can levitate, though.
But
that's true.
How can you be so religious and yet so skeptical at the same time? You're always like your first thing is always doubt. Whenever I tell you any story, you're like, that's not really true, or this is not really, and you're like, but then you'll say things like, well, my brothers had these experiences and now they're not even believers, and like
doubt.
I don't think it's. I think that God is logical, and so everything that makes sense, like when it comes to, believe in a benevolent God and someone who came down that loves you so much, like that all makes sense, and everything comes, the sacrifice, that idea of love and sacrifice, that everything just makes sense. But when there's something out of that outline, then I just go, well, God is God, so of course that can happen. But if I live life without really like having to have miracles or these extraordinary things, I still can believe. It's not. I think everything like with natural law and all that stuff, it just makes sense to me to come to that conclusion that God exists. Especially when you think about, those out-of-body experiences and all that stuff too. That still makes sense to me. I don't think that's like extraordinary. I think that makes sense because of how our body works and how God reaches us. So to me, things can be, I don't want to say like everything can be explained, but things can be led to the conclusion that God is the source.
So you don't think you've ever had any supernatural experience other than the normal experience of faith per se, or?
I mean, I have, but even I question this. Like, I remember my shoulder being like in pain and feeling like it was coming out of its socket. And I went to this charismatic prayer group, and it got prayed over. And by the time I drove home that night, I was like not feeling pain. So I do think there's a supernatural element, but that is not my first go-to. Like, I remember a friend of mine, he's like, my kids are sick, I'm gonna pray over them because it could be a supernatural thing, like the devil could be whatever he was, and I was like, what? It's viral, or whatever. So but then I'm like, that could be true. It could be something that the family is dealing with.
It could be both and, right? I
Right.
mean, that's the thing, is like Catholics are we very famously say both and.
Right.
Well, I mean,
To the frustration of many.
Yeah.
But the whole notion of, what if the miracle at Fatima was just like a mass hysteria moment? And it's like, okay, well, I mean, the coincidence of it happening right then it could still, sure, they could all have been imagining that the sun danced, but it could have been God that caused them all to imagine it at the same time.
Well,
miracle, still a miracle.
and I think like even things that when you talk about like you're feeling sick, that it could be because of all the stress, and obviously there's psychological aspects to it, but that God can work through that, or that leads to God. Like, I think everything like that has God as its source. So I don't know, but I tend to lean towards the skeptical, just because I think God works through that more often than the extraordinary.
Did you ever hear the story that Jack Handy tells about a miracle? Deep Thoughts with Jack Handy.
No.
So as he was watching the Yankees game, and they were down like 2-1, last hitter, and all of a sudden St. Francis appeared out of nowhere, hit the next ball over the fence, and Yankees won the game. He said most people thought it was a miracle, but he thought he just got a lucky hit. Sorry.
Is that how it originally went with St. Francis?
Yeah, St. Francis appeared.
Jack Handy.
In the pond.
Those deep thoughts are pretty funny.
They are really great.
Yeah. Hey, question real quick, just before we close out. I have read Catholic literature that claims that there are more than just angels and demons in the spiritual realm. That there's other spiritual things, you know. Well, I guess angels and demons as a species are this like, or as a, I don't even know how would Thomas describe this.
Yeah.
That angelic beings are like one, not species, because each one's its own species, but whatever is higher than species. But that there's other spirits, and we say it in the St. Michael prayer, right? The spirits prowling about the world.
Right.
Are those referring only to demons, or are there other kinds of spirits? I want to say that Thomas Aquinas even writes about this, but I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'll have to look at some of his stuff that he writes, but
like wisps and
yeah, I mean
fairies and stuff.
One of the ones that's a really odd one, and that's why I think the church doesn't even bother to try to talk about it, is in the old. Probably a lot of people, Jewish or not, have heard the expression Mazel Tov, but the word Mazel, which people say good luck, that's not what it means. Mazel literally means that which drips from above, and it referred to the idea that the angels in the Bible, this understanding that the angels kind of are the intermediaries between God and the world and help control all these physical things, and so that and so Mazel though isn't an angel, a sentient being. It's almost like this weird energy they exude that stays in places, and it would just stay there, except 3 times in the New Testament, Paul uses this term in Greek, stoichia, which we don't even know how to translate. They usually translate it as elemental powers. Oh. He'll say, you've listened to the elemental powers, but they're not angels. They're something else that's like that. But, but there is a lot, and just the weird things, just the fact that, some of the Jewish commentators and the really early fathers, before it got more standardized, they had all kinds of ideas because they tended to borrow from Judaism of the time, and in that idea, and you have these multiplicity of heavens, and each one has higher and higher levels of beings, and not only that, but each one sort of has their own creatures that are almost like our animals. They're not persons, but they're spiritual things that live, but again, most of that is speculative. I don't see why it couldn't be true. In fact, it may very well be. I guess it's one of those things that it doesn't really matter towards our salvation, so God doesn't give us just rise to our curiosity. Yeah, it is even what a demon is, as opposed to a fallen angel, and are they the same? I mean, we use the term generally in a general sense, but are they actually the same? If you look down at how Scripture and unclean spirits, there's so many different sort of ideas that it's
even angels themselves, right? You say they
right,
have
principalities, powers, dominions. The Old Testament has the ophanim, which means wheels, and like Justin spoke about
that's when you have like the
with all the eyes on
them. They were like cherubim, but they're like these many-eyed
wheels
with these,
and they're below the cherubim because they're like the wheels of the throne that the cherubim hold up. It's like all this weird stuff. And then you've got seraphim versus cherubim. You've got the sons of God, the Elohim. It's so how they all fit together, we have no idea really. Although we've had lots of speculation, but
what we do know is it's probably a bad idea to go hunting for bad spirits.
Yes,
a la Ghost Adventures.
Yeah,
let's not do that.
No,
it's a bad idea.
Yeah,
don't go looking for trouble. Especially when you're a former Las Vegas DJ who happened to buy, a DV camera and thought, maybe I should go hunt ghosts. It's a bad idea. Bad idea.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One episode of that, my wife and I were watching, and we just started cracking up laughing uncontrollably because they were in Alcatraz, and they were hunting for ghosts in Alcatraz. And I don't know if we're going to get in trouble for even mentioning this show, but who cares? Zach Baggins, you're kind of a charlatan. But they go into Al Capone's cell, and he starts calling out to Al Capone's ghost, like, you want a piece of this, Al Capone? We're here in your cell. I'm jumping on your bed. He was jumping on his bed or something. And then Aaron and I started laughing because Al Capone didn't die in Alcatraz.
Yeah.
Why would his ghost be there? If he had a ghost present in the world somewhere, why would it be there?
A lot of those shows are so... I enjoy them, but they're funny. It's like...
you enjoy it ironically.
Every single thing they're like terrified of. They're like walking. They're like, oh my god, oh my god. You're like, you got to make it look exciting for everyone because 90% of the time it's just idiots walking around in the dark. But
you can tell when they lose material. It's like, this episode's going nowhere. Okay, what you're gonna do is pretend that you got possessed and you're having a hard time dealing with the oppression.
Yeah.
Go. And yeah, I know. It stinks because people don't realize that they are charlatans.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they're not. Maybe they. Maybe I am assuming something that's unfair.
Well, I think, without getting into it because we're at our end, but it is something to think about later to talk about because it would be interesting to just delve into the, quote, world of ghost hunters and see, like, how does this stuff, like, how do we know this little detector can detect a ghost? Like, what principle do you use to know that it'd be nice to actually, like, at least try to explain, even from their point of view, how does this supposedly work? Because I even wondered things about that, or, if a ghost is invisible or this or that, how can it do this that everyone's,
when I get that little electro whatever, magnetic whatever thing that has the little...
Yeah.
Does it come with a manual that says, when it hits this, you've hit a ghost?
Or you turn on that thing and supposedly you hear the ghost's voice. It's like 3, 5. You're like, what is that? It's like, I'm just picking up some CB guy like 4 miles away.
Yeah, I'm not down with that.
So a lot of the things that are, quote, used to it's just very odd, I think.
But would that detect like other kinds of paranormal stuff, like maybe angels too? Like, how would...
I think it detects rats in the wall.
Yeah.
That's really...
Angels on the CB.
Yeah.
Not to make light of this subject because we were talking about apparitions this entire time and how they're real, but yeah, it's a bad idea to go hunting for bad, malicious ghosts. It's probably a bad idea to do. We don't recommend it.
No.
The church doesn't recommend it for sure, and so stay away from that endeavor entirely. You know.
And that is something that kind of ties in with apparitions, though. One of the things to see if something's really from God or not is, does what the apparition tell you of magnitude? In other words, if an apparition comes and claims to be an angel and says, hey, I'll tell you where Uncle Joe's money is buried, you have to ask yourself, really? Yeah. Is that what God would send an angel down for? The angels tend to come. They also don't tend to dialogue a lot, most often. So if the angel wants to initiate dialogue rather than just give his... they will answer questions, but if the angel wants to, quote, keep talking to you, at that point, almost like a, quote, Ouija board experience, at that point the church says, this is not right. The angels don't come to do that kind of stuff. Like
in the case of Tobit, the fact that the being is an angel is hidden for most of the journey. It's not until the end that you realize it, that it's an angel. So, anyway. But you can pray for the angels to come visit you. And you should frequently pray for them to come guard your house and take care of you. Not necessarily for visions of them, but you should pray for your guardian angels to go before you, to surround you, to protect your children and your household. And
to end, there's a prayer in the Liturgy of the Hours. I think it's for Saturday evenings, but you say it very rarely because it only happens on days that like aren't feast days or something. But the prayer is something about the angels protecting. May the angels surround this house and protect it. And I didn't realize for a long time it actually comes from the Sabbath prayer of Jews, that they invite the angels in specifically as they enter the Sabbath, and then they send them forth again at the end of it. But another thing to look up, those who are interested, and is Google and look at Angelorum. What's it called? I just talked to you about this morning, Quinn.
Is it a prayer?
Opus Angelorum. They're a Catholic religious order dedicated to the veneration of the angels.
Yeah.
And if you
Very
want
cool.
a lot of good information,
Cool.
excellent information on the church, how to correctly honor the angels without stepping into weird areas, what's allowed, what's not allowed, they're a good resource to look at. So I think it's Opus Angelorum, or Angelorum Opus is the name of the group, and so you might want to check that out. But I guess for now we'll call it a day, and until we meet again, huh?
Cheers.
Cheers.